What I'll do is I'll quickly recap what we discussed in the last session. So let me just start that. And while we are waiting for others to join in. In the previous session, we discussed about the difference between man and animal. And we went through at length explaining that both man and animal fundamentally are doing the same thing. So they are doing sleeping, eating, mating, and defending. So mating is under that category of enjoyment. So that is something just common between men and animal. The question was, what is different? So when we were thinking about what is different, we went through this discussion and we established that what makes us different is the ability to think. And then the question was ability to think for what? If the whole reason that we are thinking and using our intelligence is to eat better, have better Michelin star restaurants, to sleep better, have fancier beds, softer mattresses, or have better sex, inventing more mudras or Kama Sutra, then or defending ourselves, defending in the very big sense, in the sense that inventing insurance policies, having house which we protect ourselves, so depending in the sense of protecting, then probably we are not using that intelligence any different than animals do, right? So animals also do the same thing. They eat, they sleep, they enjoy, they defend. So if we are using our intelligence only for that, then probably we are not using it for the purpose it was given to us. And then we established that purpose of actually that intelligence is to question. And what is that question that we are trying to question? The question is, who am I? And why am I here? So that's essentially the question that we are trying to answer. And the reason why we ask that question is because through that question, we are trying to kind of understand what happiness means and why are we happy or unhappy, depending on the case. So that is actually in a nutshell the purpose of human life. In fact, one of the slokas I quoted from Hitodesha is both animal and men share activities of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, but the special property of human is that they are able to engage in a spiritual life. Therefore, without a spiritual life, humans are on the level of animals, and in fact, worse than animal, right? So we talked about this ABCD. So we said that what makes it special is the ability to inquire about higher things, the desire for a bliss. Bliss is eternal happiness, and the puts everybody on mute. Yeah. Okay, then ability to inquire about higher things, the desire for bliss, and then the freedom of choice. And we talked about this freedom of choice is probably the only thing we have. And we talked about the bounded freedom of choice because you have the three gunas, the Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas, which we'll go through in more detail later on. And then it's determination. Okay, and we talked about that animals react on instinct. They do not have that gap which humans have. So animals have, there is a stimuli and there is a reaction to it. Whereas humans, you have the freedom of choice. You can delay the response. So if I slap you, you may decide to slap me back now, or you may delay that response. And then we picked up a quote from a Western philosopher. This guy is a Holocaust survivor, and we said that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is your power to choose your response. In your response lies your growth and freedom. So what it says is that between a stimuli and a response, there is always a gap, even if it's a picosecond gap or a nanosecond gap or a femtosecond gap. And in that gap is the choice of you to make the response that you want to make. And depending on what responses you make, your growth and freedom lies in that. And we talked about Markovian process, non-Markovian process. One is part dependent, one is not part dependent. And we said that life is nothing but a series of choices. So you always have a freedom, but then at some point your freedom gets restricted. For example, if you go to Changi Airport in Singapore and then you take a flight which is going to London, before you take the flight, you have the choice of either going to London or Tokyo or New York or wherever you want to go. But after you are in that plane, then you can't say that, okay, this plane is going to New York and now I want to go to Tokyo. Yes, you can, but then you have to undo everything that you've done before. So you always have a choice, but at some point this choice becomes restricted because of your previous choices. And that is why we said that it's a non-Markovian process, right? And then we also discussed about this. We said that Bhagavad Gita actually tells you the power of discrimination. It tells you, it basically tells you what is important, what is not important, what is good, what is bad. So that with that knowledge, then you can decide how you will make your responses, right? So we covered all this, and then we said that despite being so intelligent, humans are the only species that commit suicide. Humans are the only ones who are threatened by all these anxieties. No other animal commits suicide. At least I have not come across anything. I've done some reading on this, and then I didn't find any instance where an animal is willingly harming themselves. Okay, and then we said the purpose of life is actually to have happiness, and we went through what is a temporary happiness, what is a permanent happiness. We talked about miseries, and we said that yeah, all of us might say that, oh, my life is miserable at some point in time, but there are actually only only four kind of miseries, and we talked about what are those. So the definition of misery, or definition of a real problem, is something that is common to all, that nobody wants, yet nobody can escape from it. So that's if these three are present, only then it's a misery, or it's a problem. Other than that, it's not a problem. Other than that, it's just a temporary problem. So we talked about these, and then we established that death, old age, and disease are some things which fulfill that criteria. So we call them real problem. And even then, we also established why birth is also a misery. And then we had some discussion about why birth is a misery. And I said, imagine locking yourself in a small, tiny sack in a position braced up like this, and not just and then this is very dark, and there is nothing in. I mean, it's quite good dark. Even light cannot come inside, and it's filled with liquids, which is basically your own feces and urine, and you're like that for 9 months. And now imagine that. So that's why I said birth is a misery. And from other point of view, I said that as per Gita, there is soul, and so birth and death is kind of mirror image. In one, the soul is entering the body, in the other, the soul is leaving the body. So if one is a misery, the other should be also a misery by mirror image principle, right? So we talked about those things, and pretty much that's where we left. And then we said in the next class, and okay, we also talked about these the causes of these miseries. So we talked about Adi Atmika, which is basically you are inflicting these pains on yourself. Your mind and your body is inflicting these pains on yourself through your thinking, through your stress, through your anxiety. You're inflicting these pain on yourself. That's one source of these pains. The other source is Adi Bhautika, which is basically all the material world around you. That is another source which causes all these miseries. And finally, we talked about Adi Devika, which is basically the natural causes, things like earthquake, floods, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where we ended the last session, and talked about permanent happiness and temporary happiness. How do you get permanent happiness? And pretty much with that, we ended the session. Of course, we discussed this in much more detail. And now let me go to what I have to talk about for this session. Okay. So today we are going to talk about the concept of soul, or Jiva. Now, this is actually the first time we are actually going into Bhagavad Gita proper. We are trying to discuss this concept of soul, which is essentially the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So why is this important? This is important because the subsequent session, or the subsequent discussions in Gita, rest on this premise of soul. So if you don't believe in souls, or if you can't establish that there is a soul, then there is no point talking about the laws of karma, because a lot of that discussion on karma actually rests on this axiom that there is a soul. Now, can I scientifically prove it or disprove that there is a soul? Probably I can't. I will just go through the slides, and you can make your own decision whether there is a soul or there is not a soul. But as I said before, the idea of doing this session is to tell you what is in Gita. The idea is not to make you believe or disbelieve. I'm just telling you what is in Gita, and it's your choice whether you want to believe or you don't want to believe. So I'm just imparting this to you in the format I got from somebody else, and I mentioned that I got it from very senior banker in my bank. So I took it from him, and then I had some realizations, and I'm just trying to share those realizations with utmost sincerity I can. Okay. So this question, who am I? Now, we often ask this question to ourselves, and you often are in a situation where you need to answer this question. Like people will ask you, who are you, right? And the simplest answer is you give your name, that I am Rahul. But that doesn't tell me anything, right? In fact, in this own class, we have another Rahul, and I'm also writing a book with him. And I was joking with him that our book will be whatever the name is by Rahul and Rahul. So which Rahul is which Rahul? So the name itself doesn't tell you anything. And this question, who am I, is kind of important in the sense that we are dealing with trying to understand who we really are, where we came from, and where we are headed. So this is quite a deep question. At some point in life, we will all have this question. We may choose to ignore this question, or we may choose to ponder about this question, but this question does come to our mind: who am I? Okay. Then Galina made a very beautiful video. It's a 4-minute video, and my computer is a bit fragile, so I'll not play it here, but you can watch this in your own time. So she goes through at length at explaining that ever since I remember myself, I was wondering, who am I? So she talks about her parents, she talks about her brother, she talks about going to countries, and then she says that despite traveling length and breadth, she still doesn't know who she is. And this question about who am I kept bothering her and still bothers her. So this is a very powerful question. Who are you? And then we have ways to answer this question. Who are you? So there is a modern science view. So the modern science view says that you're nothing but combination of certain material elements. And we discussed in the previous class that according to chemistry, there are 108 or 118, depending on how current your textbooks are. I think now it's 118 or 120 elements. And modern science view is that you're a combination of these elements. And it says that life actually came from non-living matter, and we'll go through that in subsequent slides. It actually says that from inert matter, suddenly life appears. And I'll go through that in subsequent slides. So the idea was that from inert matter, you had organic matter. From organic matter, you had simple life form. And from simple life form, evolution happened. So that's the idea. And I also have the slide here, which is basically Urey-Miller experiment. So what these guys did is they actually had a hypothesis that in the early time of the Earth, I think more than the life on Earth is actually 3.8 billion years old, and the universe, as we know, is itself 13.8 billion years old, right? So the idea here was that in the initial stage of Earth, you had certain gases. You had ammonia, you had oxygen, you had carbon dioxide, you had water, and then there was this water cycle through which you had lightning that was happening. And the idea which was established by Urey and Miller was that if you try to replicate those conditions, if you put water, and if you put ammonia, if you put carbon dioxide, if you put oxygen, if you put methane inside a flask, and if you try to replicate the conditions that were there initially when the Earth was just beginning to form life, you would actually, by sparking into this flask, they used electrical sparks to do that, be able to create simple proteins. And they were actually successful in creating simple amino acids and proteins. So that was fine. So from inert matter, so called in chemistry, we have organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. And there is a reason why organic chemistry is called organic chemistry. For hundreds of years, scientists were not able to replicate anything organic. Organic is something which is from life form. That's why they called it organic. So they believe that there is something which doesn't allow them to create. So that was a belief for 100 years. And then I think somewhere in the 19th century, the first organic compound that they were able to create synthetically was urea. And urea is one of the components that comes out in urine actually. So urea was the first thing that they created, and that busted that hypothesis that you can't create organic material. So far so good. So we were able to create organic material through Urey-Miller experiment, and these guys, by the way, got Nobel Prize for this. Not for this, but Urey had Nobel Prize for, I think, something else. But what I'm trying to say is that these guys are Nobel Prize winners, right? So these are not trivial guys. So they were able to create simple molecules, simple amino acids, simple proteins. And then this is the big jump now. So from there, the jump theory is, or from there we don't know how life formed, but then we say that from these amino acids, from these simple proteins, suddenly the first life form came. I mean, you can read about this in more detail in biology textbooks, but essentially it's that from these simple molecules, suddenly the life form came. So you have these simple proteins, and probably there was lipid or fat, and somehow these proteins, probably, I'm guessing now, I don't know, somehow probably in this uh, in this uh, in this evolution, what probably would have happened is that this simple protein got encapsulated by some lipid, and that probably is very rudimentary form of virus that probably came, and then bacteria came. So that's the theory, but nobody has ever been able to prove it. And there is a big jump. There's a big jump from saying that there's uh, these fundamental proteins, and from there you get life form. In fact, Urey Miller experiment was able to make those fundamental proteins, but was not able to create life. Then you have people like Hargobind Khurana who have been able to create gene outside of human body or outside of living entity. But there is still a big jump from inert to creating life. Uh, we have not been successful, or there is no theory which tells you how that happens. So that's where modern science stands. It stands. So they say that uh, men or all life form are combination of some materials, and through these simple inert material you have complex proteins, and from that life evolves. Now, as I said, there is a jump in that. It's not as straightforward, it's not that linear to actually conclude that from inert material like hydrogen, oxygen, you suddenly get life. It's not that simple, it's not that straightforward, it's not that intuitive, it's not that well established either. Okay. Then but when you look around, there are questions that bother us, which is like, where do we come from, where do we go after death? So these are the questions that bother us. And I think, so this is Dr. Harry Monson. So what he's actually also extending that idea that human beings are nothing but bunch of chemicals. So he broke down what are the chemicals in our body. So he says in a 60-pound person, you have 5 pounds of calcium, 1.5 pound of phosphate, 9 ounces of potassium, then so much sulfur, so much magnesium, so much iron, so much copper, so much iodine. So he broke down that, because modern science view is that we are bunch of chemicals. So this is the list of chemicals in our body. Now from that list of chemicals, he deduced that the total worth of human body is 250 rupees or 4 US dollars. Because if you are nothing but these chemicals, then this is your worth. But do we feel that our body or we are worth just $4? Do we feel that? No, right? We don't think that we are $4. So there is something more than just those chemicals that is there in the body. So what is that? So we don't feel that we are a bag of chemicals, right? We don't feel that we are a bunch of chemicals. And if it were true that we are a bunch of chemicals, so if we combine these chemicals, and if somebody has a formula, a magic formula for creating life, then you would probably get the same result every time, right? But then we know that there are about 7.8 billion people on this planet, and all of them have different personalities. In fact, even twins, which are identical material-wise, genetically, and even twins who are brought up together, which means their even their upbringing is similar, they have different personalities. Despite having the same material body, despite having the same upbringing, they have different personalities. So what is causing that difference in personalities? They often go to the same school, they often are given the same food, everything is identical, but yet they have differences, right? So that happens. So again, this slide is trying to say that if we are a bag of chemicals, then how is it from those chemicals we are able to experience so many of these different kind of emotions? We feel happy, we feel frustrated, we feel anxious, we feel depressed, we feel shocked. So how is all this being created? So what this slide is trying to say is that from a bag of chemicals, suddenly you have life, and that life form is experiencing all these emotions, which is kind of, if you think about it, a big jump from inert matter. You're creating life, and from that life, and that life is experiencing all this. So, so that the idea is to make you think that from inert matter to coming to life is not that straightforward a process if you just look at scientific theories on that. Okay. So the question again: who am I? What is my true identity? Am I Rahul, or am I something more? And who is Rahul, by the way? So that's the question. Okay. So again, we'll go through this difference between living and non-living. So we know this. So probably the difference between living and non-living and dead even. So the definition of dead is very clear. Dead is something which is actually non-living, but at some point was living. So that's the definition of death. So when we say somebody died, then it means that at some point they were like a living entity, and now they cease to be that, and that's why they are dead. So what makes you living or dead? So it is actually consciousness. Consciousness is nothing but the idea about awareness of yourself, the idea that I am, the idea that I exist, the idea that I am here. That idea is consciousness. Consciousness is actually the easier way to describe consciousness is describing first what unconscious means. So when we say somebody is unconscious, we actually mean that this person has no idea who he is. And then there are various levels of consciousness. You become more and more aware. So consciousness is basically awareness, how aware you are about yourself. The more aware you are, the more conscious you are. So if you faint, we say you're unconscious because you're not aware of who you are, where you are. So, and as you get more and more aware about yourself, as you get more and more aware about this question about who I am, then you are quote unquote more conscious. So that's the idea of consciousness. So if that is consciousness, then what is the source of consciousness? Now, modern science view is that the source of consciousness is your body. It's the same matter that makes up your body. So those 118 elements in the periodic table, that is the source of your consciousness, that is creating your consciousness. But so far we have not been able to create that consciousness. We have not even been able to create that consciousness, a consciousness even at a basic single celled level. So we are not able to create consciousness from inert matter. Maybe 2000 years later we are able to, but as of now we are not able to. So it's fair to assume that we are not able to create consciousness. So there is something that we're not able to replicate in our labs. Now, why are we not able to replicate that? I don't know. Maybe it's the same thing as organic compounds. We are not able to do it for 100 years, but maybe in 2000 years we will be able to. But as of now, we are not able to. So the the question is, where is that consciousness coming from? And that is and the answer to that is actually in Gita. So Gita talks about consciousness and talks about what is consciousness and what causes that consciousness. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay. So this is again the inspiration of whatever I discussed before, which is the material viewpoint of what is life. The material viewpoint of what is life is actually that we are a bunch of chemicals. From those chemicals, cellular structure is formed, and we are nothing but that cellular structure. This cellular structure experiences different kind of emotions, which we talked about: happiness, pain, anxiety, depression. So all this is experienced by this biological entity. So that's the material viewpoint. Now, the spiritual viewpoint is that there is more to this. So it doesn't negate anything that modern science says. It agrees that we are bunch of those bunch of those, we are a combination of those chemicals. It agrees with that. But then it goes over and beyond. What it says is that besides that, you are also a spiritual being. So that dot that is just coming up, that is actually signifying soul. So what it says is that beyond all this, there is soul. Now, in the next few slides, we will kind of establish that in three ways: through logical explanation, through scientific explanation, through scriptural explanation, what soul is and does it really exist. So this is again a beautiful slide on comparing so-called living and non-living. So humans can speak, they have a mouth to speak. A car has a horn, it makes sound as well. Humans can see from eyes, a car in some sense can see through its headlights. Humans have heart, and through heart blood is pumped. Cars have radiators that supply water. Humans have hands and legs, car has wheel. Now what is different? The difference is that without a driver, this car is going nowhere. So the idea is that if this body, which is capable of speaking, if this body, which is capable of seeing, if this body, which has a heart which beats, if this body has a hand and leg which can move, is there something inside that is driving all this? And the answer to that question is soul. At least that's what Gita says. And I will again repeat, the purpose of this course is to tell you what Gita says. So as per Gita, there is a soul that is driving it. Now, one example that I can give you is, let's say you're living at this very moment, and suddenly uh, there is a person who's living, and suddenly this person dies. Like, so within one moment before when the person was living, and one moment later when the person was is dead, the body is same. Nothing has fundamentally changed. You still have those 118 elements of periodic table in your body. You still have that eye. You still have that nose. You still have that hand. So what has changed? What has suddenly changed that now that hand cannot move? Now that eye can't see? Now that heart can't beat? Now that brain can't think? And of course, we have different definitions of death. We have clinical death. We have brain death, and so on and so forth. So even the definition of death is, or definition of what is living, what is dead, is so ambiguous in modern science. But we agree that something changes, right? At death, something is there that stops working. So what is that something? The idea is that it's soul, and in Bhagavad Gita they talk about the properties of soul. They talk about even the size of soul. They say that it's 1/100th of a size of a hair or something like that. They talk about. So the idea in Gita is that just like a car can't move without a driver, this body can't do anything without a driver, and the driver of this body is actually soul. That's the fundamental idea of Bhagavad Gita, and rest of Gita is explaining what the soul is, what this soul wants, and where is this soul headed. So if we do not establish soul, then the concept of karma will not make sense, the concept of life and death will not make sense, and rest of Gita will not make sense. So to understand Gita, we need to first establish that there is a concept of soul. So even if you don't agree there is soul, you have to understand that the basic axiom of Bhagavad Gita is that there is a soul. So from that it builds on. So as I was saying, we will establish this logically, we will establish through scientific methods, we will establish through scriptures that there is a soul. So logically, we always say this, right? We say my hand, my head, my leg, my body. So if we say my leg, my hand, my body, my head, so who is this my? Who is this my who's saying my hand? Why don't I say I hand or I body, I head? There is, when you say my means association, right? So you are associating this hand to something. So what is that something that you're associating this with? So maybe Galina is an expert in linguistics. Maybe she can explain why do we say my hand? Why don't we say I hand? Why don't we say uh, the hand or whatever, right? We always associate with this to something else. So there is some intuitive sense that we are attributing this to something else other than this body. So when we say my hand, it's like associating that to something else, probably soul. Okay, again, when we say somebody has died, or when we say she has passed away, so who is this she? The body is still there. So who is that she that has passed away? What is that has passed away? Because fundamentally that body is same, right? And there is some hilarious experiment that was done on this in, I think, 50 or 70 years back. The joke is that the weight of the soul they measured was, I think, about 8 grams or 8 ounces or something like that. And that someone was doing experiment in hospitals, and they were trying to measure the weight of person when they were alive and when they died. And due to some flaws in their measurements and in their experiment, they concluded that the weight of soul is, I think, 8 ounces or something like that. It is kind of weird. Now we know that there is no truth in that. You can't actually measure the weight of soul, but we know that when a person is alive and when a person is dead, something changes. Uh, we say that this person has passed away. So who is that who has passed away? Again, we are trying to establish through logical or through intuitive or through linguistics that we have some intuitive idea that there is something that goes on, something that leaves, something that is actually the cause of all causes inside us. So when we say my hand, my head, my leg, so what is this my? Or when we say that somebody has passed away, what is it that has passed away? When your car breaks down, you don't say that the car has passed away. You don't, right? You just say that the car has broken down. But for a person, you don't say the person has broken down. You say the person has passed away. So what has passed away? So that's the idea. Then uh, scientifically, there is a lot of research which has been done on this so-called out-of-body experience and near-death experience. So what is done in these cases is a lot of hospitals around the world. There are researchers who are very interested in this topic, and a lot of doctors have actually written on this phenomenon. So you might have heard from some people that you know, or you might have heard stories. I personally don't know anybody, but I've heard this from secondary sources that there are people who claim to have had near-death experience or out-of-body experience. So what happens in these cases is these people are severely injured, and these people are then uh, in some kind of hospital, and doctors are working very hard to bring these people back to life, and somehow doctors are successful in doing that. And after that happens and this person recovers, this person is able to describe at length about what was going on. So they would say that, oh, I was on top of my body, I was seeing you guys were giving me electric shock, you guys were doing this, you guys were doing that. They can even describe which doctor was there, how he looks like. So these are not possible unless you have actually witnessed that. And in some experiments, what have they done is they have even tried to put something which you would only see when you see things from top. So for example, they will put some pictures on top of a rack, and this rack is not at the body level. So it's like imagine there is a wardrobe or there is a cupboard. On top of that, there is some X-ray film or there is some picture or something on top. Now you can't see that if you're just lying on the bed, but you can see it if you are actually like this person who is hovering on top. So if you're here, then you can see it. And in some cases, what has happened is that people have been able to describe not just the operation theater, not just what was going on, but also that picture. They said, oh, by the way, there is a picture up there. So how did they see that picture? Now, of course, you can argue that some of this is uh, this might not be true and people are just making up stories, but then there is enough documented evidence to say that a lot of people are not actually taking this. So again, the same thing about passing. So when I said that there is a lot of documented stories on this, so Dr. Ian Stevenson is a Canadian guy who was a professor of psychiatry in West Virginia. He's actually a professor in University of Virginia. He has done a lot of research on this. So he has documented more than 2,000 cases of reincarnation. And similarly, in India, this lady, Dr. Satwan Pasricha, has also documented a lot of Indian cases. Uh, so one of the criticism for Dr. Ian Stevenson was that he actually, a lot of cases were actually coming from societies where people believe in past life or people who believe in reincarnation, such as India. So his counter to that was that actually very reason why these societies believe in past life, the very reason why these societies believe in reincarnation is the reason why we are able to document this. Because in these societies, you're not shunned when you talk about past life, when you talk about where were you in the past life. Whereas in the Western world, people don't believe in this concept of rebirth, this concept of reincarnation. So if you talk about these things, you're made to shut up. So that's one of his counters. The other thing he has done is he has actually written a book in which he talks about the European cases of reincarnation where people don't believe in reincarnation. So he has done quite a substantial work. There have been criticism about him as well. So people have said that he is a sincere guy but easily gullible. But at the same time, in the scientific community, nobody has been able to refute a lot of his examples, a lot of his cases. So in some cases, what he has researched and found out is that people recall past life, and in one case, one guy was saying that he was shot by a bullet, and he actually remembers where he was shot, and the place where he was shot was on his throat, and at that place where he was shot, there was a birthmark. So so they were that was visible, and that is something which this person who was telling about past life knew. But then Dr. Ian Stevenson said that okay, if the bullet actually hit at the throat, from the post-mortem report, they knew that it actually exited the body from the skull, from the head. So then, what Dr. Ian Stevenson was trying to check if there is a mark where the bullet left the body, And to his surprise, there was. So this is again documented. Now, I'm not an expert on this, and I'll just take it as given. And there are people who have criticized this, people who have done extensive research on this, people who have countered this. But the fact remains that people who claim to remember their past life, if you verify their data, there is some truth to it. They are able to remember details about their previous life, which they would not unless they have gone through those experiences. So much so that they remember things like putting, let's say, some money in some corner of the house, which nobody else would know. And they, when you open that box or when you open that place, you actually see that money. So there are cases which are documented on that. And then the question is, why is it that only some people remember this and not everybody remembers? So as per scripture, it's a blessing that not everybody remembers that. In fact, very few people will remember that. The idea is that imagine, according to Bhagavad Gita, you have millions of lives. Now imagine if you have, imagine if somebody passed away in your family. That grief is so empowering that for a few days you are not able to operate, right? I mean, let's say somebody passed away in your family, and then I'm saying, hey, let's go party tonight. You would not feel like it. Now, take it a bit further. Now, imagine that if you remember your own death, and not just one death, if you remember millions of your own death, the baggage of that would be so heavy that you will not be able to properly function in this life. The idea in Gita is that in order for you to properly function, in order for you to properly operate in this life, that memory is erased. But while the memory is erased, there is some things that are retained, and we will go through in subsequent slides what is it that is retained. So what I'm trying to tell you is that very few people remember that, and you can call it a glitch in the matrix. People who remember this, it's more like an anomaly than a norm. Again, in the scriptural sense, people would say that the reason why some people remember that is so that we have some proof, some evidence that actually this theory of reincarnation, the theory of karma, the theory of soul is not just fluff. So that's the explanation which people say that the reason why 0.0001% people remember that is actually so that we have some faith in these things. Okay, and these are again cases which I was talking about, which have been documented, which you might have read about this in newspapers, especially in India. You keep hearing these things very often. Then there are books written on this. Some of you might have read these books, and a lot of these books are actually, let me see, most of these books on this page are actually written by Western philosophers or Western scientists or Western doctors. So this book, many lives, many masters. I think some of you I discussed with you on bilateral basis said that you have read this book. I have read none of these books. So later, when we are open to Q&A and comments, you can tell what you read in these books, and if you believe in it, did it make sense? I've read none of these, but I'm aware that such books are available. I'm aware that these books talk about reincarnation, talk about soul, talk about life after death and life before life, things of those nature. One more thing I would like to point out is that every time a person like Dr. Ian Stevenson is doing research on these things, he will always have critics. So there was a critic I think he was a critic from Washington Post, and this guy didn't believe in this. So he traveled with Dr. Ian Stevenson to counter Dr. Ian Stevenson's experiences and examples and case studies. So when he traveled with him, his idea was to refute him, but after spending some time with Dr. Ian Stevenson and going through cases firsthand, he was actually himself convinced that there is soul and afterlife, and he in fact wrote a book as well on the same topic. So it's kind of ironic, right? And that's ironic, but not ironic at the same time. That sometimes we don't believe in things, and then we try to refute it, and then when you see it or when you experience it through yourself, you don't have reasons to refute anymore because you establish it yourself that yes, this is not something that someone is cooking up, but this thing seems to be legitimate. I personally haven't gone through that experience. I haven't had this so-called out of the body experience or near-death experience. Uh, but Galina somehow says that, and that she has had in the body experience, which is kind of even more rare, and I'd not even heard of that before she mentioned. So most experiences about you being soul are when people talk about them being out of their body and experiencing their body from top or from outside. But as Gita says, that soul is quite small. According to Gita, the dimension of soul is 1,000th of a tip of the hair. Now, that's not as precise as saying how many picometer or how many nanometers that is, but you need to understand that this is said in the context of what people would understand. So saying that it is 1,000th of a tip of a hair is essentially saying that it's quite tiny. So that tiny thing that is inside you is actually soul. And Galina somehow says that, I don't know when she had that experience. I think she told me once that she had that experience, and then she felt that she was a soul and she was trapped in this body. And maybe later, if she is comfortable, she might want to share about this. If she's not comfortable, she may not share about this. So in Gita, it says that the source of everything, which is the source of our source of our consciousness, source of what makes you aware that you are, the source of what makes you different from a dead entity is actually soul. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is not something that manifests because of those chemicals that are in your body or those cellular entities that make up your body. Consciousness, according to Gita, is actually a symptom of soul being there. So it's actually if as if soul is inside your body, then you're conscious. If I take out soul, then you're not conscious. So that's the idea in Gita, that consciousness is not a result of those chemicals interacting with each other. It's not something that you create in your brain. Consciousness doesn't sit in your brain. Consciousness, that's the idea. So if the soul is in your body, then you're conscious. If the soul is not there, then you're not conscious. And consciousness, as we discussed, is basically awareness, and we discussed about various levels of awareness. And in subsequent class, we will go through different life forms. And I think when we do the concept of karma, so when we talk about life going from one life form to another, so we'll talk about those 8.4 million species and exactly what kind of species are there, how many types are there, and the last 400,000 of those are human-like, not human, but human-like. So Devas, Indras, Varun, and all will also come in that category, and even Brahma will come in that category. So that is what we call Jiva Tattva. So Jiva is soul. So Jiva in Hindi or in Sanskrit, Jiva we understand as life. But in Sanskrit, it also means soul. So Jiva is actually, so you are a Jiva because there is a soul inside you. So that's the concept that we're discussing right now. Now, it again goes on about the properties of soul. So it says that which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. So it's saying that the soul is indestructible, and you probably have heard about this, that soul cannot be cut into pieces. It cannot be wet by water. It can't be dried by air, and so on and so forth. Again, a quote from Gita. So soul is imperishable, so it doesn't die. That's the concept, that soul never dies. Now it says that now again, what's the difference between soul and what's the difference between so-called spiritual body and material body? So Bhagavad Gita 7.4. So when I say 7.4, it means 7th chapter, 4th verse. It says, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, all together these 8 constitute my separated material energies. Now I'll come to what it means by mind, intelligence, and false ego in the next slide. But what it's saying is that these 8 elements are actually what is creating your material energy. So everything material is nothing but these 8 elements. Those 8 fundamental elements are what is creating the material body or everything material around. And then it says, besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, there is another superior energy of mind. Besides this, there is a superior energy of mind. So it's talking about inferior energy, and superior energy. So what is inferior energy? And inferior energy is a sum total of all those eight elements. So the combination of that is creating everything that you see around, including life forms, including Brahma, by the way. And then besides that, there is a superior energy of mind, which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material, the inferior nature. Now, what does it mean? So it's kind of very beautiful. So it says that there is inferior material world around, which is basically everything that you see, the earth, the universe around, the space, even other living entities that you see are created from those eight separated material energies. And these are inferior. Why is he calling it inferior? He's calling it inferior because it is superior energy, which is basically soul, which is exploiting not in the sense like you exploit a slave, exploiting in the sense as utilizing this material inferior energy for. So the soul is actually, how do I say this? The soul is superior energy, and everything else is inferior energy. The superior energy is actually utilizing everything that is inferior around us. So what does it mean in practical world? So you may be minor, you may be a trader in a bank, you may be a surgeon, you may be whatever, but what you're essentially doing is, as a jiva, as a soul, you are doing nothing but exploiting or utilizing everything which is material around you. So you could be doing whatever, but that is essentially what you're doing. So if you look at it, and I keep on saying this time and again that Bhagavad Gita is actually a set of frameworks and laws, and we discussed in the previous class about Adi Bhautika, Adi Atmika, and Adi Adevika, saying that everything that happens in the world happens because of these three elements, or these three causes. And we said there is nothing beyond that. You can classify something as mosquito, something as coronavirus or whatever, but all of those can then be classified into those fundamental three. So similarly over here, what it's saying is that soul is the superior energy, which is exploiting everything material around us. You could be doing whatever profession, but actually you are essentially doing just that. So that's the beauty about Gita, right? It covers so much in so little. And that's why I like Gita personally. So as I was saying, we'll discuss this in more detail. So in the first lesson, we discussed about gross elements. So gross elements are those 5 elements that we all know about. So we talk about earth. So earth is the most gross, then it's solid. Then there is water, which is less gross than earth. So it's more subtle in that sense. So it is liquid. Then you have actually air should be the third one. The air, which is gaseous. Then you have fire, which is essentially energy. And then where there is nothing, there is ether. So even Bhagavad Gita is so smart, right? It even talks about vacuum, it even talks about ether. So it says everything material is a combination of this. Now you may argue that earth is not an element, and you have 118 elements. But what is element? Element by definition is something from which you can create something more complicated, right? So in that sense, earth is elementary. So through earth, earth is one of the components that goes into creating something. So our body has carbon, has calcium, and has so many other elements, iron, magnesium, potassium, whatnot. But if you think of it, all of that comes from earth, right? And earth not in the sense that, not just in the sense like this earth, but earth in a more broader sense. Earth in the sense, everything that is in the universe, which is solid in some sense, that is earth, that is the concept. So the gross body is a combination of these 5, and we don't argue or we don't debate that. Beyond that, there is subtle body. Now, what is that subtle body? That subtle body has 3 constituents: mind, intelligence, and false ego. So let me first discuss what is mind and intelligence, because in English, we use that interchangeably. We say somebody is smart or somebody is intelligent, somebody has a powerful mind, somebody has a smart mind. When we say somebody has a smart mind and is intelligent, we kind of use that interchangeably. We do not distinguish. But in Gita, they distinguish that. So what they say is mind is simply responding to stimuli. So there are senses. We have those 5 senses, and mind is just simply reacting to those senses. So the example that I give often is, which I've given in previous classes as well. So if you bring sweets, the mind will tell you eat it. But let's say if you're diabetic, then it's your intelligence which will tell you, hey, you're diabetic, don't eat it. But if you don't have that intelligence, if you only have that mind, then mind is going to tell you that, hey, this is sweet, just eat it. Because you are just responding to your senses. Your senses see a gulab jamun, your senses see something that, or gajar ka halwa or whatever, and then, or chocolate or whatever you like, and your brain will, or your mind will simply say, eat it. But it's your intelligence which tells you don't do. So that's the difference between intelligence and mind. And there is a slide, I think, further down, which explains this in a pictographic sense. What is false ego? Now, false ego is a very interesting concept. The false ego is actually the concept that you are this body and nothing more. And what is the creation of that false ego? So false ego, actually in Sanskrit, the term is aham. This concept of aham, or this concept of मैं, or this concept of I. So who is that I? If you believe that I is this body and nothing else, that is actually what is termed as false ego. And this false ego is a very, very powerful concept, because everything we try to create around us, right? When we say that I want to, this is my house, this is my wife, this is my husband, this is my body even, right? When you say this is my body, when you say this is my PNL, this is my trade, this is my degree, this is my computer. Everything that you talk about my, that is false ego. That aham, that this idea of aham, this idea of saying that that I exist, this idea of saying that this me, this is actually a fundamental root cause of a lot of problems. This idea of pushing that boundary of I, this idea of creating more territory around myself, this idea of creating more and more about I, and creating more and more about me, that whole concept about me, who is this me? And we will, in subsequent discussions, when we come to the concept of karma, we'll discuss what is a true me and what is a false me. So this false me, or this false ego, is actually believing that you're this body and nothing more. And how does that come into existence? That comes into existence the time when your soul enters your body. You develop this layer, or this concept, or this false concept of you are this body. That is actually called false ego. Now, the interesting thing about your subtle body is that when you die, when you go from one body to the other body, or when your soul leaves the body, you can't carry any of those gross body. That's why when I said that when somebody says he's passed away, that gross body is still there. That earth, water, fire, ether, all that is still there in that body. I mean, we know this. We know that the gut inside us has air for some time. We know that there is water inside our body. Even if you die, there will be that for some days, even some months, even. But what is it that leaves? The soul leaves. What is it that leaves along with the soul? Along with the soul, what else leaves is your mind, intelligence, and false ego. So your mind, intelligence, and false ego goes with it, goes with your soul. That's why it's called subtle body. Now, the question then is that if my mind, intelligence, and false ego is going with me, why don't I remember things? Because we associate these things with our brain. So you do remember some things. Some things are carried with you. So the personality that you have is carried with you. What is deleted is those memories. And they also say that your karma goes with you. And the way I like to compare that is the concept of cloud computing and a local copy. So some people ask, where is this stored? So it's like there is this guy Chitrakup who maintains the entire register of every Jiva. So that's a cloud computing. So he has a copy of that at his level. And then in your own body, you have a local copy of which is pertaining to your own self. So in your local copy, you have this concept, or you have this subtle body. You have this mind, intelligence, and false ego that is sitting in your local copy. In the local copy, you have that. On a universal level, Chitragupta is responsible for maintaining the uniform register of everybody. It's like, when the government has census, so you have your Aadhaar card, or you have your own NRIC. That's something which you have, but you don't have mine, or you don't have somebody else's. But the government has everybody's. So that's the concept there. So that subtle body is actually something that you carry with you. Now, beyond these 8 material elements, you have something called spiritual body. What is that spiritual body? That spiritual body is actually soul. That's the concept in Gita, at least. So Gita talks about these 8 inferior energy and this superior energy, which is soul. And what is a property of that soul? That soul is actually Sat Chit Anand. So Sat means something which is eternal, which will always be there. Chit means something which is aware, which is conscious. That chit, that consciousness is actually coming from that chit. And chit is knowledge, chit is awareness, chit is knowing that who you are, what you really are. And ananda is bliss. Ananda is basically eternal, never ending happiness. So the idea is, at least conceptually, that there is something called soul. This soul, the property of this soul is that it is eternal, it never dies, and there are verses in Gita which establish that. And this soul is all knowing, it has all the knowledge that is there to know, and it is always happy, forever happy. So what happens to us? Well, if this soul is inside us, then why are we not eternal? Why don't we have all this knowledge? Why are we not always happy? The way it's explained in Gita is that this soul gets covered with this material body, which includes, by the way, that gross body of 5 elements and that subtle body of 3 elements, which is mind, intelligence, false ego. So that's the concept. You are essentially a soul. So see, scientifically, we look at it in a different perspective, right? We start building it from bottom up. We say that there are elements. From those elements you get simple proteins, then you get cell, then you get organs. From those organs you get tissues. From tissues you get organs. From those organs you get body, and that's what you are. Over here it's taking a helicopter view. It's saying that all that is true, but actually you are a soul. So there is a soul. That soul gets covered with this subtle body, which travels with you from one life to next life. And then when you are born on the planets, when you're born on either on Earth or wherever else, you are covered by this gross body. So it's going from soul to subtle body to gross body. So that's the concept. Okay. So again, the same thing in a pictographic way. You have a soul, then there is subtle body, and then there is a gross body. So this is something how I understood it. So the beauty about about the scriptures is that it's not negating anything that science says. So science talks about that dull body, that body which is material, right? And we study all that in physics, right? So in physics we study about energy and matter. So science explains that. We have some idea of senses, so we are able to explain how senses are created. We are able to explain that eye sees, nose is able to perceive smell. We have some idea of how that happens. But again, I would say that the physics is more precise than biology, because biology is, see, we don't have a periodic table of animals, or periodic table of life. We have some classification we do using we have some classification, but that's not entirely as comprehensive as it is in physics. So what I'm trying to say is, as you go higher up, it gets more and more difficult for science to explain. So dull matter, to large extent, we are able to explain. We kind of know what happens in supernova. We know what happens in black hole to some degree. We know what happens in the solar system, but we don't know what happens inside human body. Like we are still not 100% sure how heart operates, right? And how mind operates. We don't know those things. Then beyond that, there is mind. Mind, we have very little idea. So all this idea about psychology and all, we have very little idea of what is mind, how does it operate. So it's not as precise, right? Definitely not as precise as saying that gravitational force is equal to m times n divided by r square, or nothing of that nature, right? So we are not as precise in biology or as precise in metaphysics. So given a ball, if I throw the ball, I can precisely tell you at what time it will come back. But in biology, given a life form, we can't tell precisely how long it will live and how those things will interact. So that's why I'm saying biology is not as precise as physics. Metaphysics is even less precise. And when we go to the realm of intelligence and soul, we don't know what intelligence is actually. I mean, despite knowing artificial intelligence, or despite being able to create artificial intelligence, like we can say that there is a machine which can actually tell you if something is red in color. It can tell you something is red in color, but do you think it experiences what red is? Do you think it knows what red is? Do you think it knows what green is? It can probably distinguish red from green. It can do some OCR. It can probably, you have now technology so advanced that if I actually print this paper and if I run it through an OCR, it can actually convert that picture into what it can actually say, okay, that is soul, that is intelligence, that's what's written there. But do you think it understands that? So the concept is no, it doesn't understand. So despite us trying to create artificial intelligence, it's not the same as natural intelligence. It's just artificial intelligence is nothing but actually given large set of data, systems are able to deduce something. So we know that when the traffic light is red, we are supposed to stop. When the traffic light is green, we are supposed to go. That's something which we have learned. That's something which we know. We know that from seeing and from observing. So you can design systems in which you give no data. You just put a camera in front of a traffic light, and given enough data, that the system will be able to deduce that red means stop and green means go, despite not being programmed to do that. So that intelligence is there, but the intelligence of experiencing what red color actually means, or what is it, what is the experience of knowing what red color is, not yet there. And then the idea of soul, as I said, we don't even talk about it, right? And people like Ian Stevenson or Dr. Pasricha have done work on this, but there is no universal acceptance of that in science, right? There is a lot of work that still needs to be done, a lot of work that has not yet been done. So as we are moving up, we are having less and less idea about these things. So that's what I'm trying to capture here. Then again, the same thing in Gita. So it says that the working senses are superior to the dull matter. The mind is higher than. So it's saying it's trying to establish that hierarchy, which I talked about in the previous slide. So it says that working senses are superior to dull matter. So dull matter is inert; it doesn't have any life form. So working senses, your nose, your eyes, your senses are superior to that. Then your mind is superior to those senses, and your intelligence is even superior to that. And finally, your soul is even more higher than intelligence. And next slide explains that. So you have this nose, eyes, skin, tongue. Those are your senses, ears, those 5 senses. The mind is like that rope. So if mind is like that rope, and you and your brain, your intelligence is like that man who is sitting behind, who is controlling that, and soul is like that white guy behind. So what does it mean? So if the intelligence doesn't control that mind, which is represented by that ropes, then these senses will pull the mind in all directions. So even in Gita, Arjuna says that, oh Krishna, you're telling me to control my mind, but I can control the wind, but I can't control my mind. So the idea is that mind is so fickle and so prone to be carried away by senses that without the intelligence, you can't actually control it. So that's the idea that is being depicted in this picture. And to control the intelligence, so mind is controlled by intelligence, but what do we use that intelligence for? So to control that, I mean, do we use the intelligence to make more nuclear bombs or to do something better? So that, who will control that? Who will decide that? The idea is that the soul is going to decide that. So unless your soul is refined, unless you're doing something to your soul, unless you're giving the food to your soul, unless you're giving the understanding to your soul to understand that, your intelligence will not know what to do with it. It probably will be doing the same thing, will be doing seed, which I talked about, sleeping, eating, entertaining, and defending. It will be inventing better ways to sleep. It will be inventing better ways to eat. It will be inventing better ways to defend ourselves. It will be inventing better ways to enjoy ourselves. But beyond that, nothing more. So it will just be doing just that. And that is not the purpose of life, actually. So the same thing. And this is again saying how the soul is different from body. So body needs nourishment. So you eat food, you get nourished, right? Similarly, your mind needs, your intelligence needs nourishment. Why is it that we like to read? Why is it that we like to solve puzzles, right? So because your intelligence needs nourishment. Similarly, the soul also needs nourishment. But if you don't nourish soul, if you don't understand the purpose of soul, if you don't understand what soul is, then you can read everything in the world, you can eat the best food in the world, you will not be nourished, right? So the nourishment, the thing that nourishes your intelligence, the thing that nourishes your body is not the same that will nourish your soul, it's different. So that's the idea which is captured here. So again, this is a topic for next sessions. We will talk about the concept of karma and transmigration of soul. So this is called samsara in Sanskrit. So basically it says that the soul goes from one body to the next body, and there is a shloka in Bhagavad Gita which says that when the body becomes old, the soul leaves the body and goes to the new body. So we'll discuss about this later. Okay, this is again a very fundamental verse, and this is often a topic of great debate between Advait and Dvait philosophy. So it says that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So we know that in this world, a lot of people are going to die. So why is Krishna saying that never there was a time that I will not exist, you will not exist, or these kings who are here will not exist? What is it that will not exist? So the idea here is that the soul will not. Soul is the one which will never cease to exist. And when we do the concept of Kala, we will establish uh, how the what is the smallest unit of time, what is the biggest unit of time. We'll establish that Kali Yuga is 1200 Deva years, which is basically 4,200 human years, which then we have then Kali Yuga, Satyuga, and so on and so forth. And we'll go on and establish that there is 311 trillion years in the life of Brahma, which is basically the lifespan of universe according to all scriptures. We'll establish all that. But what it says is that even after 311 trillion years, when the universe ceases to exist, the soul still is there. That's the beauty, right? I mean, even when the whole universe finishes, even when everything finishes, and 311 trillion is a lot of time, by the way. The modern science establishes that the universe is only 13.8 billion years, and I won't be surprised if that number changes at some point. But scriptures say 311 trillion years. So even after trillions of years, the soul still will be there. That's a fundamental topics or fundamental assumptions or fundamental axioms in Bhagavad Gita. So again, the same thing. For soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, everlasting, and primordial. He is not slain when body is slain. So it's saying that soul cannot die. Essentially, that's what it's establishing here. The same thing again in another verse. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by wind. So despite this soul being inside this material body, it is not influenced by any of the material thing that's around us, including being cut by weapons or being burned by fire or whatnot. Actually, I will go on to say that soul is actually an alien in this material body. So the soul doesn't belong here; it belongs to somewhere else. So, the real destination of soul is somewhere else. It's just lost here. It has to go somewhere else, and that's a topic of discussion for subsequent classes. Again, as I keep saying, that we'll discuss all these concepts in great detail. So when we do the topic of karma, and when we do the topic of yoga, then we will. And yoga, as I said, yoga means joint or connection. Connecting to whom? Connecting to what? So when we go through that yoga, then we'll establish that where does soul come from? What is it supposed to do? Why is it an alien on this material world? So we'll discuss all that in great detail. And I think it's the last slide. So it says that individuals. So what's the difference between soul and super soul? So super soul, the concept of super soul is Paramatma, and we will again go through these concepts about various concepts of God. So you have Brahman concept of God, which is basically present in everything that is material and everything that is there in the universe, including life forms. And then there is this Paramatma concept of God, which is basically present in everything that is living, or the Jiva. So we'll talk about those concepts and in great detail further on. But in this slide, what it's saying is that the soul is actually same as the super soul. Super soul is, you can assume that to be God actually. So super soul and soul is actually the same thing, and the difference between soul and super soul is just like, there is a spark that can come from a fire, which is all the properties of fire, but is not actually fire. Similarly, soul has all the properties of the super soul, but is not the super soul. So that is actually the concept of the soul being eternal, not being eternal, but soul being distinct from the super soul. So this is where the Advaita and Dvaita philosophies kind of differ. So in Advaita philosophy, what they say is that the soul and super soul is one. In Dvaita philosophy, what they say is that although the soul and super soul are similar, but they are not the same. So that spark is there, which is all the properties of the big fire, the infinite, the Vibhu, and the Anu. That is the concept there, but it is not the same. And that's when I said that this topic, this Bhagavad Gita 2.12, is a great topic of debate. So this concept about soul always being there, always existing. The debate there is, does it exist as an individual entity, or does it exist as something which merges with the super soul? So that is, again, these concepts are at the very fringes of the Hindu or the Sanatan Dharma philosophy. It's I think from a practical point of view, it's more important to understand concept of rajas, tamas, and sattva, and how they interact with us, how the human, how the jiva. We discussed in the first lesson that Gita only talks about 5 things. It talks about prakriti, kala, jiva, ishvara, and karma. So the whole Gita is actually how the jiva is us, or any living entity, interacts with prakriti. Prakriti is all the material nature that you see around us. In kala, kala is time, and the laws that govern these interactions are the laws of karma, and overseeing all this is the Ishvara, or the supreme controller. So Gita is essentially, if you were to sum up Gita in just one sentence, it will be how the jiva interact with prakriti in kala, governed by the laws of karma, which are designed by Ishvara. So that's what Gita is. So Gita in that sense is what I would say an instruction manual to understand this universe around you, to understand your own self. So with that, I have actually concluded of whatever I had to discuss for this session. So I'm happy to take any questions, or if you have any comments, or if you have any realizations, or if you have anything that you'd like to share. Anybody has read these books that we discussed, whatever you would like to share or comment, please feel free to do so. And as I say often in every session, that I'm just sharing something that I have learned from somebody else. I'm not expert, I'm not a guru, I'm not claiming to be one. But if you have any question, I and Galina will try to answer this with utmost sincerity that I can. Galina has done this for longer than I have done. She has read these books for more than 25 years. She has translated some of these books in some of the Hindu scriptures into Eastern European languages. So obviously her understanding, her realization is much more than mine. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer this.
Rahul, actually, quite a few questions today.
On the
first
chat, there
one,
some people wrote already. Yeah, please go ahead, Neha.
yeah. So the first one is about you saying that the concept of ego is very strong. When you talk about me, I, that ego is very, very strong. So we have in our scriptures a verse, Aham Brahmasmi,
Yeah.
which itself starts from Aham, or me, or I. So how do we define that? Because the concept of that verse is not a egoistical interpretation. It's more like I'm part of the divine soul. But then the word that describes it, or that qualifies it, is I. So is that part of the egoistical nature, or is it beyond that? How would you classify that?
It's a beautiful question. In fact, on contrary, it's anything but. It's actually the exact ulta of what you're saying. So this concept of Aham Brahmasmi is actually telling you that you are nothing but the Brahman concept of God. So if you believe that you are you, if you believe that you are yourself, if that concept of that ego tells you that, if that egoistic belief in you tells you that aham is aham, I am I, then there is this ego that kicks in. But if you believe that you are a part of this, if you believe that you are the one with the Brahman, if you believe that you and the Brahman is one and the same thing, if you believe that, if you have understood, if you have realized that you are one that has created the entire universe, and you are not just that who has just created the entire universe, you are the universe itself. Once you have that realization, once you believe that you are Aham Brahmasmi that you are saying, then there is no difference between you and I. You have reached the level where there is no me, there is no you. There is only I. Like I often say that, right? You start with this concept of no God. That's your beginning. Then you say, first you start with no God. There is no God. Then you start with many gods. Okay, there are many gods. Then you go to the next level, which says only one God, and finally you say only God. So from no God to many God to one God to only God. So that concept of Aham Brahmasmi is anything but that Aham. So it tells you that you are nothing but this entire material creation, and not just that entire material creation, but you are the creator yourself. So when you have that concept, there is no I, there is no you. You are nothing but the one. There is the boundaries merge at that point, right? If you're saying Aham Brahmasmi, so before you start saying that, you need to first understand what Brahman is. Brahman is the sum total of everything that is around you. So if you are sum total of everything that is around you, where is you? Where is I? Where would you draw that boundary? Does that answer you?
And that brings me to the other question. So we all heard about and heard you say speak about the concept of soul today, but that is just a concept in our head. We just know that yes, there's something like a soul existent, but how do we realize it? How do we know what the soul is? I mean, there might be something inside me, but I'm just hearing about it, I'm just reading about it, I'm not realizing it. How do we go about that?
Okay, how do you realize that you have intelligence? How do you realize that?
In the physical and materialistic scope of things, there are certain parameters which define that a person's intelligence basis your capabilities, the things that the way you interact with people. That is how you realize. I mean, so someone tells you that you're intelligent, you get good marks,
No. I'm not talking about IQ, but I think I get the concept. So you are saying you realize it because somebody tells you, and in your interactions, you know that you're intelligent, right?
yeah, something on those lines, in the materialistic, totally materialistic way.
Exactly. So similarly, on those lines, how do you know that you have a soul? Your behavior will change. Once you realize that you are a soul, once you realize the purpose of soul, once you write Satchit Anand, once you realize that once you have that, once you realize Aham Brahmasmi, once you realize that you are nothing but the entire creation is nothing but one. Once you realize that, you will start seeing everybody around you as you. You will start seeing them as the part of the bigger scheme. You will cease to seeing. You will stop seeing the differences. Once that happens,
Yeah,
the
but
way you,
how
the way
do I realize that? The question
yeah,
is not about
I'm coming to that.
when does it
I'm
happen.
coming to that. So once you realize that, the way you interact with others will change. Once you see a change in your behavior, once you see that you've stopped thinking about maximizing your own self, maximizing your own selfish needs, but you start thinking beyond yourself. Once you realize that, that's when you actually have arrived. That's when you have actually understood that there is a soul. That's when you, like you said, now how do you understand you are intelligent? That's, and you said that you understand when others tell you, when in your interactions with others you will feel it. Similarly, you realize that you have a soul once you are interacting with others, and your interaction with others is at a level which is beyond the self. How will you know that? You will yourself know it, and others will come and tell you as well. By the way, for you there will be no others, but
I
still there are other jivas which will come and express that to you. So you will understand that yourself, and others will also come and tell you.
okay. Can I add a little bit
Sure.
here? Uh, all right. So today, actually, I don't know. Like we hear the questions, but as I was listening, I heard that I would like to chip in with quite a number of things. So, soul, right? The concept of soul. I totally relate to Neha's question here because it's a very important question. Understanding that okay, first of all, there is a misconception between I have a soul and I am a soul. And I will go back to that after I will say something related to what Neha has just asked. How do I know that I have a soul? There is no way to answer this question. It's the same as how do I know that I'm happy? How do I know that I'm a soul? How do I know that I'm happy? How do I know that I'm part of spiritual and not the material? The only way we can answer this question is when we feel it. How do we feel it? It's through our own process. So when you look at a small baby, how do they know that they have a body? First of all, they don't even know that, right? Because their consciousness is at a totally different level. Like if we look at it from the Bhagavad Gita perspective, they just changed the body, right? They just came from some other life to this human life. They don't even know that they have a body. So what they do, they stretch their arm, they stretch their leg. Mommy does something or Papa does something and they are like smiling. Oh, I have an arm, you know. Yeah. So how do we know that we have a soul? So that then that little baby's body is growing, and then the body, the little child realizes that he or she has a physical body, and then, oh, wonderful, then this body starts interacting, and then the baby doesn't know how to talk. The baby doesn't know that it has intelligence. Uh, but uh, through interaction, they start interacting, and then after some time, they acquire some sounds, they manage to produce some sounds, they get language, they start talking. How does language appear? There is this very good psychologist, Vygotsky, who was explaining very nicely the processes of internalization when the baby points at something, and then the mommy says what it is. The mommy tells the word. In every language, it's different. So then the baby realizes, oh, this thing is, corresponding to this. So it's a very, very gradual process. The same is with the soul. We can't know that we are soul because we are in the material world. And the soul is a spiritual concept. So now it's very difficult to have an interactive session through online, but each of you just think for 5 seconds and imagine you're talking to someone and you're trying to explain to them, starting with I, me. And then how do you point your finger when you say I? You want to show to another person that this is you. How do you point your finger? Neha?
I point to the person in front of me. This is you, like
No, you, about yourself.
point it towards me, but I mean, that is immaterial.
Is it somewhere around your heart area?
Yes, most likely yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you point at someone else, you also point somewhere around the heart area, right?
Yes. Right.
So interestingly, we don't remember our past lives. We don't remember our spiritual nature because we are in the material body, and we have been in the material body for like zillion of years by now. So we have lost our spiritual connection, but we still remember that I is somewhere around the heart. We don't point to our forehead, we don't point at our leg, we don't point at our hand, we say I and point at the heart.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I've always had this observation, and I didn't know why it is so. So in Gita, it says that the soul, they do not give the precise size of the soul. I think it's more for people like me who are linguists, who don't make good friends with numbers. So the soul in Bhagavad Gita is described as 1/10,000 of the tip of the hair. So it's just probably to show how small it is. I don't know how it is in nano, whatever it is. Rahul will probably be better to explain how big it is, but it's so tiny. It's impossible to see. So there is this misconception, like, I know because I come from the Christian kind of like a bit of a background. So Christians will say, my soul wants this, my soul wants that. So it's already like the starting point, the counting point is already a bit skewed because it's not. So if I have a soul, then who am I? We definitely know that we have bodies, right? But when the body dies, then, uh, yeah, so what happens? So then do we cease existence or we don't cease existence? So soul is something which we don't know, which we do not see, but we are souls. So I mean, this is from the Gita perspective again. So somebody might accept it or somebody might not, but this is how it is. So the counting point is understanding that I am a soul. But because we are in the material world, we have to exist and act in the material world. So we need to have a material body. But because soul is so complicated, so subtle, and it has spiritual features, it cannot come to the material world and act as a soul. Can you imagine like tiny, tiny portions? Can they move the table? Can they put the chair? So there has to be something. There has to be the material body developed. So that's why first there is this ego coming. So first, when the soul enters in the material world, it starts. There are two egos. There is a true ego and there is a false ego. So the true ego is understanding that you are spiritual. You're a spiritual soul. You're part of the you're part of the spiritual world. You're not part of the material world. But in order to act in the material world, you have to develop some kind of, thinking that you are material. And this is where illusion starts. So once the soul enters the material world, this illusion slowly grows, just like the baby body develops. The same way the entanglement and the attachment to the material develops through the false ego. The soul starts thinking that he or she, I have some disagreement there, maybe even if it's in Bhagavad Gita, but it should be she, because when we start doing the portion on Prakriti and the supreme and all, souls are actually all she's, but it's okay. So the soul starts thinking, okay, I am actually material. So then the false ego develops. Then the soul starts developing consciousness. This consciousness goes inside the material body, and like consciousness is actually, we are realizing every part of our body. Like I can move my fingers, I can move my legs, I can think of something. So we have mind, we have false ego, we have intellect actually. Very often with all these things, we are lost in translation. Intelligence is actually, I just checked because, as Rahul says, I'm a linguist, so I go into the depth of the meaning of the words. So intelligence is actually the ability to acquire knowledge. So somebody is intelligent because he can get more, understand more. Somebody is not so intelligent, he can understand less. But there is this thing which is intellect. Intellect is the reasoning. So intellect is how much I can reason. What is good, what is not good, what is right, what is not right, what is this, what is that. Then after that, there goes mind. Mind is directly related to our senses. I smell something, nice cake. Okay, let's go eat it, I hear something, oh, nice music, let's go jump. All this kind of stuff. And then there is this physical body. So the soul is actually slowly develops this attachment to the material world to the point that we forget our true ego. Yeah, so this is what happens in the material world. And it is necessary because in order to live in this material world, this little particle, tiny sparkle, it has to have the material body. When we talk about the soul and we talk about the spiritual body, it's also not easy because it's the same as, let's say, the sperm comes into the egg. It cannot just become a body straight away. It has to develop. It becomes bigger, then comes out of the womb, it develops. So the same is with spiritual. Once we have had enough of entangling in the material, we're totally confused. We don't know who we are. Let's say our mind is like totally asking questions which we cannot answer. Then somebody, all of a sudden, there is Bhagavad Gita which starts telling you this. And if somebody at this point realizes, oh yeah, I'm spiritual soul, then this is just a small moment of time from which the development of the spiritual body starts. And it's up to the person whether to start developing the spiritual body or not. And the spiritual body in the material world can only develop when we connect to the super soul, when we are doing the activities which are related to the super soul. So this is my understanding of the Gita, sort of like. Yeah, and also when...
Very beautifully explained, Galina. Very beautifully explained. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. And also, Rahul, that portion where you had this pyramid, different sciences, I think psychology should be there. I don't know whether you came with that slide on your own, or you saw the idea somewhere, but I think we have physics, we have something else. So somewhere there is psychology, and we all know that psychology is a science which has not always been there, It sprang up on the border of philosophy, biology, and other sciences somewhere at the end of the 19th, at the beginning of the 20th century. So it just shows that whatever achievements were there, yeah, this one,
Yeah,
whatever achievements were there in physics, let's say, biology and all started breaking through, that was not enough. So there was a great need of finding out and studying what actually happens in human mind, in human emotions, because um, yeah, all these things are interrelated, so psychology should be somewhere there. I think it's somewhere at the border of senses actually deal also with psychology. So I think it's somewhere at the border of all these three.
Doesn't the mind also deal with psychology along with metaphysics? It should be a psychological aspect also to it.
Yes, yes, both senses, mind, and intelligence, all three of these. But psychology cannot go anywhere to the soul level because it's a very difficult level. And
so the
yeah,
idea of that slide was saying that as we go up the ladder, we know less and less. Uh,
yes, yes,
so that's the idea. So you can classify mind in psychology or senses in biology, but the idea is that see modern science is very proud of being able to harness the dull material nature, right? So we can fly aeroplanes, we can do a lot of those things, but as you go up, it becomes so much more difficult to answer those questions, right? If I asked what is intelligence, what is soul, that's what we're struggling with, the question which Neha asked, right? Because
Yeah.
those questions are something which we cannot answer from, like if I ask, if I try to biologically deduce what intelligence is, I won't be able to.
yeah, yeah. I
But
mean,
I
it's
think there cannot be an absolute answer to this. Everyone will probably have their own journey, and it's just
yes,
that we need a pointer or a direction to which to take to realize this journey on our
Yes,
own.
that's again a beautiful point. So you asked me, no, how do you know that you're getting spiritual? How do you know that you have a soul? So
Yeah.
think of it like a pyramid. So you would know that you are getting more evolved or you're getting more aware of your source of your soul is when see, there are too many things that happen in our life, right? And they all have propensity to make us uneasy, the propensity to make us disturbed, the propensity to uh, make us be like not be at ease with ourselves, right?
tension, yeah.
Tension. So the more you are aware of that your soul, the more you're closer to that Satchit Ananda. So the more you're closer to that, you will realize yourself that the less disturbed you are with all these things that go around you. So that is one of the ways. It's not a direct proof, but that is one of the properties. So when you see that you're getting more calm, when you see you're getting more serene, you're not so affected by the things around you. You will obviously be affected. You have the material body. You are on this planet. You will be affected, but you will see that your outlook to things changes. So that's when you know that your soul is evolving. We talked about that. We showed that parrot wala slide now, where you had this. When I said that for your body you need food, for your
Mm.
mind or for your intelligence you need books, you need to read, you need to do puzzles. For your soul, you need to understand that you are a soul. And that understanding, once you have, then you will understand that you're Satchitanand. Once you understand that, you will understand the temporal nature of the material world. Once you understand that, you will start being less anxious about things around you, and that's when you realize that you're actually moving up in your spiritual journey. If that is not happening, then probably you're on the wrong journey. So that is another proof. So if by studying all this, if by reading all this, you're not able to make sense of the world around you, you're not having a more serene outlook,
Mm.
then probably you're not getting there.
Mm.
Well, it's not that easy to get it from the very beginning. It's same as we are learning all our life. So the spiritual realization, they're there for your whole life. It's not like, oh, okay, I finished the university, I became learned. It's not like that. It
I
doesn't
think
work
it's
like
not
that.
even a journey of one lifetime. It'll probably take a couple of lifetimes. It's not as if I just understand I have a soul and I just get enlightened.
Yeah.
So in Gita it says it's not couple of lifetimes. It's like so. Another thing it talks about is that whatever realizations you have had, you carry it with you. So you're right. So it's whether it's couple or if it's couple of thousands, I don't know, but it's a gradual process. So not
So, Rahul,
everybody
may I share one thing here? So,
sure.
you
Yes.
mentioned one book here, Many Masters, Many Lives, and I have read that. In that book, they talk about this concept only that your soul is carrying the previous learnings, and when you move from one life to the another and probably move to a higher plane, they talk about the concept of different planes also in which your soul resides after passing away.
Hmm.
So they say that you move to another plane of higher consciousness and to a better life or maybe a different life only when you realize the lessons that you are supposed to learn in that lifetime.
Yeah, so we'll
So
go through that, so we'll go through that in the concept of karma when we talk about different. So Isha Upanishad talks about in great length. It talks about various lokas that you're talking about. We'll go through that. So you're right. Uh, so it is actually what it is. So through karma you can go up and you can come down also. By the way, it's not a one-way trajectory.
yeah. So like if you have learned something and you don't utilize that in the current life you are in, probably you will go back to again learn it. You have to complete that learning before you move higher up, or let that lesson, that concept has to be practiced also in the life that has been given to you.
Yes, exactly that.
There is also 2 points I would like to add to this. That's true. We have to realize something in this life in order to come to the higher kind of like level of consciousness in the next life. But the problem is that our memory gets wiped. So the material knowledge, whichever we have, doesn't really, I mean, it stays there in the subtle body of our mind, intellect, and the false ego, which travels from body to body, from different physical body to different physical body. But we cannot automatically retrieve the stuff which we realized from the past lives. I mean, nobody can do that. I don't know anyone from any of my friends who said, okay, it comes as insights, you know. It's like there is, Plato was writing, there was this interesting thing, I read it a long time back, so I can't remember that, but he was talking to the slave in the ancient times. And he was trying to pose questions to this slave, and then this slave somehow automatically, by answering the questions, he was answering, he sort of like was solving some complicated geometrical theorems or something. And then he was saying that, you know, he was trying to prove that there is past life, you know. This person couldn't have just come out with all these realizations if he was not doing this in his past life. So there are indirect ways that we can have some insights, but there is no such thing, okay, I want to know music, okay, because in the last life I was a musician, okay, automatically I'm born and, you know, I I'm a musician. Maybe like Mozart, he had that like since the age of 4 he had that. Maybe it was like in his immediate past life he had that, and the memory came back so fast. But it happens very seldom, you know, it doesn't happen that often. But the spiritual knowledge, whatever we do for the development of our spiritual body, like in that slide where Rahul was showing that we have physical body, we have a subtle body, and we have spiritual body. Spiritual body is not just the soul, yeah, I mean, it starts from the soul, but it's all the knowledge, the spiritual knowledge, the seva we do, the realization of our true ego. All this can be carried over to the next life, yeah. So this is at least this is what the scriptures say, yeah.
Do you have any other questions or comments?
One more thing to add to the list of the books, Life After Life. There is this author whose name is Raymond Moody, Moody, I don't know how to pronounce it properly. So he wrote a book in 1975 where he was interviewing 150, he's a psychiatrist. He was interviewing 150 people about their afterlife experience or something like that. So there is a movie documentary on that. It's about 20 years old or something. I think you should be able to get it somewhere on the YouTube. Yeah, so you can see that. It's quite interesting.
Galina, can you please ping the name of the person or the movie so that we can
Yeah,
search for it?
Raymond Moody. So it's
Okay.
Raymond
Yeah.
Moody.
Okay.
Life
Thank you.
After Life.
Thank you.
And also, you know, a lot of phobias, they say a lot of phobias are actually remembrance from past life. So there are people who do this, they go into past life regression and all, but ideally you should not be doing it, because there is a reason why your past life memories have been erased. So you should not consciously go and try to rekindle those. At least I think you should not. But then certain people have phobias and people are not able to figure out why they have phobias. And when they go through this past life regression, some people claim that they were conditioned better, so became better. So that is also another kind of, at least partially, you have some proof that there is past life. Any other questions? Any other comments? Any other addition to what we discussed today from anybody else? So there was one question which Ruchira wrote. She says, does Gita mention only humans have soul? Animals like dogs and cows are also aware of self? Gita doesn't mention that only humans have soul. This is totally not correct. Uh, Gita says Gita says Jiva, right? And Jiva is living form. So all living form have soul. What Gita says though is that only humans have karma. The animals do not accumulate new karma. They are just passing time, and we'll go through that in detail when we come to the topic of karma. So the difference between humans and animals is that humans have karma, or human-like forms have karma, or they have consequence of their actions. Animals don't have, but animals do have soul, very much so. Shall we end the session now?
Yes, I think
Okay,
we have more questions. I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, if you have more questions, if you have more comments, or anything you'd like to share, you please reach out to me. So that's for everybody. If you have anything that you'd like to share, please reach out. Thank you so much for joining. In next session, I think we'll discuss karma, which is again a very fundamental concept. And we did discuss this concept of soul, because without discussing soul, we can't move anywhere in Gita. So next we will probably discuss karma.
Thank you so much, Galina and Rahul.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rahul.